Hey everybody, welcome back to the second part of our study on the 38 prophecies fulfilled in the life of Christ. This is week 2 of the Jesus, uh, the life of Jesus the Christ Bible study. Um, and we had just left off in Psalm 110. And we find this really interesting prophecy. In verse 4, it says, "The Lord has taken an oath and will not break his vow. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Okay, so you're probably saying, huh? Who? What? When? Where? Why? How are you talking about? Well, we're going to talk about this Melchizedek character. Interesting thing about Melchizedek, he's only mentioned twice two other times in the entire Bible. Once in the Old Testament, once in the New Testament. And so let's set the stage for his Old Testament appearance. Abraham and his nephew Lot had been traveling through the land with their flocks and families, and their herdsmen started having disagreements with each other because there was too little land and too many sheep. And so Abraham says, Lot, we got to do something. I think we should split up. If you say you'll go to the left, then I'll go to the right. If you want to go to the right, I'll go to the left. And so that's what they did. And Lot, however, made a bad decision. Because the plain where he ended up going was also the plain in which the lands of Sodom and Gomorrah were situated. And at some point, these two kings went to war with these other kings, and Lot and his family were caught in the crossfire. They were captured, and they were held for ransom. Abraham finds out about this, and he raises an army of over 300 fighting men to go and rescue his nephew Lot. Okay? So that's going to bring us to Genesis chapter 14. Okay. And we're going to start at let's see. Okay, verse 11. The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and headed for home, taking with them all the spoils of war and the food supplies. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and carried off everything he owned. But one of Lot's men escaped and reported everything to Abram the Hebrew, who was living near the oak grove belonging to Mamre the Amorite. Mamre and his relatives Eshcol and Aner were Abram's allies. When Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued Chedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them at Dan. There he divided his men and attacked during the night. Chedorlaomer's army fled, but Abram chased them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abram recovered all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot, with his possessions and all the women and other captives. After Abram returned from his victory over Chedorlaomer and his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and a priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine, and Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing: Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. Okay, so this Melchizedek, why it intrigues me so is because you have to take into account that God did not institute the office of the priest, the high priest, until after the events of the Exodus, which is years away. And so how was this guy a priest of God Most High? How did he become a priest of God Most High? Nobody knows. Yet the Bible says he was a priest of God Most High. And let's take a look at Hebrews chapter 5. Okay, Hebrews 5. All right, let's see. Okay, it says, every high priest is a man chosen to represent other people in their dealings with God. He presents their gifts to God and offers sacrifices for their sins. And he is able to deal gently with ignorant and wayward people, because he himself is subject to the same weaknesses. That is why he must offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as theirs. And no one can become a high priest simply because he wants such an honor. He must be called by God for this work, just as Aaron was. That is why Christ did not honor himself by assuming he could become high priest. No, he was chosen by God, who said to him, "You are my son, today I have become your father." And in another passage, God said to him, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Okay, so this is this is not just the second, the final appearance of or mention of Melchizedek in the Bible. It is also the fulfillment of the prophecy from Psalm 110 that Jesus, or Messiah, would be a priest on the order of Melchizedek. So Jesus, even though he didn't have any formal training, much like Melchizedek, he was appointed by God to be that high priest. So just one more instance how Jesus has fulfilled the prophecies that are mentioned, or that we're talking about. It's 38 prophecies that are fulfilled in the life of Jesus. Our next prophecy comes from the book of Zechariah. Chapter 9, verse 9. Rejoice, O people of Zion, shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious. Yet he is humble, riding on a donkey, riding on a donkey's colt. Okay, so this prophecy is referring to the triumphal entry of the Messiah into the Holy Land. And the fulfillment is found in Mark chapter 11. Okay, Mark chapter 11, verses 7 through 11. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments over it, and he sat on it. Many in the crowd spread their garments on the road ahead of him, and others spread leafy branches they had cut in the fields. Jesus was in the center of the procession, and the people all around him were shouting, "Praise God! Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Praise God in highest heaven." So Jesus came to Jerusalem and went into the temple. After looking around carefully at everything, he left because it was late in the afternoon. Then he returned to Bethany with the 12 disciples. Okay, so Jesus did fulfill this prophecy that he rode into the town on the back of a donkey, on the colt of a donkey, and the people were recognizing that this was fulfillment of the prophecy. That is why they laid down their blankets, why they laid down branches for him to walk over, because they recognized that he was fulfilling the verse from Zechariah 9:9. Our next prophecy comes from Book of Psalms, chapter 41. Okay. Verse 9. Even my best friend, the one I trusted completely, the one who shared my food, has turned against me. This is a prophecy that the Messiah would be betrayed by a close friend. The fulfillment of this prophecy is found in Luke chapter 22, okay. Jesus is betrayed and arrested. But even as Jesus said this, a crowd approached led by Judas, one of the 12 disciples. Judas walked over to Jesus to greet him with a kiss. But Jesus said, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" When the other disciples saw what was about to happen, they exclaimed, "Lord, should we fight?" We brought the swords, and one of them struck at the high priest's slave, slashing off his right ear. Okay, so Judas was the one who betrayed Jesus in fulfillment of Psalm 41:9, that he would be betrayed by a close friend. Okay, that brings us up to Zechariah 11:12. And I said to them, "If you like, give me my wages, whatever I am worth, but only if you want to." So they counted out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. This is a prophecy that the Messiah would be sold for 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a slave in that time. The fulfillment of this prophecy is found in Matthew 26:15. Okay, backing up to verse 14. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Okay, so what's the big deal about this 30 pieces of silver? Well, like I mentioned, it was the price of a slave. And ironically, Jesus became a slave on the cross. So from that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Judas was one of Jesus' inner circle. He was one of the 12 people chosen by Jesus to be a disciple. Jesus knew all the time that Judas would betray him. So that brings us to Psalm 35:11. Malicious witnesses testify against me. They accuse me of crimes I know nothing about. They repay me evil for good. I am sick with despair. Yet when they were ill, I grieved for them. This is a prophecy that the Messiah will be accused by false witnesses. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verses 57 and 58. Actually, I'm going to back up to verse 53. They took Jesus to the high priest's home, where the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of religious law had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by the fire. Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they couldn't find any. Many false witnesses spoke against him, but they contradicted each other. Finally, some men stood up and gave this false testimony. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without human hands. But even then, they didn't get their stories straight. Why is it so important that Jesus was condemned by these false witnesses? Well, it's very important because this entire trial before the council was totally against all of Israel's laws. There isn't any facet of it that did not violate one of the 10 Commandments or laws of the Torah. In fact, one of the 10 Commandments says, thou shalt not bear false witness. And that is exactly what was going on here, is that he was being accused of various things by these people who could not verify what they were accusing him of. And the religious leaders knew that it wouldn't stand up in a court. That's why they had to have this kangaroo court to find Jesus guilty so they could take him before the Roman authorities, because the Hebrew authorities did not have the right to put a prisoner to death. And they wanted Jesus dead. So they had to do that by appealing to the Roman government. Okay, Isaiah 53:7. He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. And we'll come back to Isaiah 53 briefly, but I want to talk about this prophecy was that when accused, the Messiah would be silent. He wouldn't say anything about the accusations being made against him. Nothing to defend himself, nothing to refute what they were saying. And this prophecy is fulfilled in Mark chapter 15. Wrong. Mark 15 and verses 4 and 5. Verse 3, Then the leading priests kept accusing him of many crimes. And Pilate asked him, Aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they're bringing against you? But Jesus said nothing, much to Pilate's surprise. Now you might be asking yourself, scratching your head and asking you who this Pilate guy is. And he was the Roman governor of Judea. He was pretty much the highest Roman authority in all of Judea at that time. And he is the one who would make the decision whether Jesus is going to live or die. Little realizing that it had been determined hundreds of years previous that Jesus would have to die for the sin of the people. All right? So this proves that Jesus was fulfilled the prophecy that the Messiah would be silent to accusations made against him. Isaiah 50, verse 6. I offered my back to those who beat me, and my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mockery and spitting. Okay, this is a prophecy that the Messiah would be spat at, would be smitten, and the fulfillment of this prophecy is found in Matthew chapter 26. And let's see, verse 67. All right, Matthew. (26:67). Then they began to spit in Jesus' face and beat him with their fists. And some slapped him, jeering, Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time? Again, a prophecy about the Messiah fulfilled in the life of Jesus. Psalm 35:19. Don't let my treacherous enemies rejoice over my defeat. Don't let those who hate me without cause gloat over my sorrow. This prophecy is about the fact that the Messiah would be hated without reason. It is fulfilled in John chapter 15. Okay. John 15, verses 24 and 25. If I hadn't done such miraculous signs among them that no one else could do, they would not be guilty. But as it is, they have seen everything I did, yet they still hate me and my Father. This fulfills what is written in their scriptures. They hated me without cause. So Jesus was hated. He is still hated to this day. You don't believe me? All you got to do is look at some of the political ads running right around now. Okay, Isaiah 53:5. Back to Isaiah 53. And I'm actually, for a little bit of context, I'm going to go back to verse 1. Who has believed our message? To whom has the Lord revealed his powerful arm? My servant grew up in the Lord's presence like a tender green shoot, like a root in dry ground. There was nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance, nothing to attract us to him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Yet it was for our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. This is probably one of the most well-known prophecies of the Messiah. It was that we, humanity, would be healed through his wounds. And the fulfillment of this is found in Romans chapter 5. Verses 6, 7, and 8. When we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. Now, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And since we have been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, he will certainly save us from God's condemnation. So, what I want to really touch on is the power of this healing we received through his wounds. A lot of people take the approach that it was only physical wounds that God healed us from through the blood of Christ. They put more emphasis on the physical than on anything else. And while it is definitely true that Jesus went about doing miracles, healing people, bringing the dead back to life, he also always met people at their deepest need. I mean, I think about the 10 lepers. And Jesus healed these 10 lepers. And only one of them returned to thank him. And Jesus said, where are the other 9? But he met that leper right where he needed to be. He needed a physical manifestation of healing before he was open to receiving anything deeper from the Messiah. And that's what Jesus did with all of the miracles he performed. Yes, he met physical needs, but most importantly, he met spiritual needs. Our next prophecy is found in Isaiah 53:12. I will give him the honors of a victorious soldier because he exposed himself to death. He was counted among the rebels. He bore the sins of many and interceded for rebels. This is a prophecy that the Messiah would be crucified or put to death with the guilty. And the fulfillment is found in several of the Gospels, but I want to touch on Mark. Mark chapter 15, verses 27-28. It was, actually, I'm going to go to verse 25. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. A sign announced the charge against him. It read, "The King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Okay, so these are the rebels that the verse in Isaiah was referring to. He was crucified with 2 guilty rebels. Okay, our next prophecy is from Zechariah 12. Verse 10. Then I will pour out a spirit of grace and prayer on the family of David and on the people of Jerusalem. They will look on me whom they have pierced, and mourn for him as for an only son. They will grieve bitterly for me as for a firstborn son who has died. This prophecy is about the fact that the Messiah would be pierced through hands and feet. And we find the fulfillment of this in John chapter 20. Verse 27. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." Okay, so in this particular instance, Thomas looks at the wounds in the risen Messiah. Psalm 22:7. Psalm 22, verse 7. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and shake their heads, saying, "Is this the one who relies on the Lord? Then let the Lord save him. If the Lord loves him so much, let the Lord rescue him." This is a prophecy that the Messiah would be scorned and mocked. And the fulfillment is found in Luke. Luke chapter 23, verse 35. The crowd watched and the leaders scoffed. He saved others, they said. Let him save himself if he is really God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." So Jesus, again, fulfilling prophecy of the Messiah, that the Messiah would be scorned and mocked. We only have 9 prophecies left to go. Psalm 69:21. Your insults have broken my heart, and I am in despair. If only one person would show some pity. If only one would turn and comfort me. But instead they give me poison for food. They offer me sour wine for my thirst. This is a prophecy that the Messiah would be given vinegar mixed with gall. And that fulfillment is found in Matthew chapter 27, verse 34. They went out, in verse 33, they went out to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. The soldiers gave Jesus wine mixed with bitter gall, but when he had tasted it, he refused to drink it. And the poison was gall. I'm not exactly sure what kind of poison it was, if it just speeded along the crucifixion process. I don't believe that's what it was, but nonetheless, Jesus fulfilled prophecy again. Psalm 109, verse 4. I love them, but they try to destroy me with accusations, even as I am praying for them. They repay evil for good and hatred for my love. This prophecy speaks to the fact that the Messiah would pray for his enemies. And it was fulfilled in Luke chapter 23. Verse 34. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. So Jesus prayed for his Messiah, just as the prophecy said the Messiah would. Psalm 22. Okay, and that actually goes back to what I was just reading about the soldiers gambling for his coat. Psalm 34, verse 20. For the Lord protects the bones of the righteous, not one of them is broken. This prophecy alludes to the fact that no bones would be broken in the Messiah's body. And it was fulfilled in John chapter 19. And this one needs a little bit of explanation about the crucifixion itself. And so I'm going to take a little time and explain a few things about the crucifixion to you. Okay, crucifixion was the most horrible way a person could die in that time. It was extremely brutal. Most men did not make it past the scourging, which is where they would take them and tie them to a post, and they would whip them with 40 lashes with what they called a cat of nine tails. And this was a brutal device. It was a whip, but at the end of the whip were 9 single strands. And on those single strands, they would put hardened bone. And they would tie them to the end, and they would whip their back with that. And then those bones would just rip right into their flesh, and they would pull that whip back out, and it would tear the flesh away. So when I say most men didn't even make it past the scourging, it is not something I say lightly. Most men would die of blood loss before they even got to the cross. John 19. Also, something else I want to point out is the whole thing about Jesus being hammered to the cross through his palms. I take issue with that because a person's weight would naturally draw them down, and if they did it through the palm of the hand, then the flesh would just tear away. But I believe what they did is they hammered the nails right in there. You see that? Right in there. There's a bone. There's 2 bones there. And there's this tiny little space between those 2 bones. The bone that connects your hand to your wrist. So they would take that nail and they would put it right through the middle of your wrist so that your bones would actually act as something to hold you up on the cross. Instead of your arms tearing away from the weight, it would support your weight. They also hammered you. They would cross your legs, and they would hammer through both feet. Okay, John 19. And verses 32. Okay, it was a day of preparation, and the Jewish leaders didn't want the bodies hanging there the next day, which was the Sabbath, and a very special Sabbath because it was Passover week. So they asked Pilate to hasten their deaths by ordering that their legs be broken. Then their bodies could be taken down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the 2 men crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they didn't break his legs. One of the soldiers, however, pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water flowed out. This report is from an eyewitness giving an accurate account. He speaks the truth so that you may continue to believe. Okay, so again, Jesus fulfilling another prophecy of the Messiah. And what was the purpose of breaking their bones? Well, quite simply, it wasn't the blood loss that killed you in a crucifixion, but it was the fact that you died of asphyxiation. As you're hanging there, you had to breathe deeper and deeper and deeper each time just to catch a breath. And your body weight would bring you down, making it that much harder for you to breathe. And the only way you could breathe is by using your leg muscles to push up, and then you could get a little reprieve. By breaking their legs, they were not able to push up and get that extra breath. So that is why they broke their bones. But when they got to Jesus, his bones had already been broken. I already covered about his side being pierced. Let's see, Isaiah 53:9. Okay, Isaiah 53, verse 9. He had done no wrong and had never deceived anyone, but he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave. This prophecy is that the Messiah would be buried with the rich. It was fulfilled in Matthew 27.